Hello, this is Group 5. Our assignment for this module was to read and evaluate the International Federation of Social Workers Statement of Ethical Principles. Here is our presentation. We hope you enjoy it. Who is the International Federation of Social Workers? According to their website, the International Federation of Social Workers is a global organization striving for social justice, human rights, and social development through the promotion of social work, best practice models, and the facilitation of international cooperation. The IFSW currently has 116 country members and actively works with organizations such as the Economic and Social Council, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization in order to provide a global voice for its members and the principles of their profession.
Principles article, and some of the main points that it touched on was the international challenges and the limits of social work in other countries, as well as the fundamentals set by the IASSW and the IFSW, and I'll just briefly go over what that is in a second, as well as several conventions that they had to recognize specific human rights internationally, and they touched a little bit on the principles of social work, including human rights, social justice, and the professional conduct. So some of the things that we learned from this article that were new for us was first off just about the IFSW, which is the International Federation of Social Work, as well as the IASSW, which is the International Association of Schools of Social Work. I know me personally, before reading this article, I had no idea they even existed, so it was really, really interesting to find out about organizations that are very, very pertinent and important towards the field of social work and other international affairs, as well as looking at the fundamentals of the social work from the international perspective. A lot of them are very similar, if not the same, as what we do here in social work in the United States. So I thought that was really, really interesting. One thing that really interested me personally was the human rights conventions. I think that is an excellent idea, and I think that is something that we should do here in the United States if it's possible, just to be able to recognize a specific human right, to put light towards it. If that's something that we could do here, I think it would be an amazing effect and an amazing impact.
Within the Social Work Ethical Principles document, I found some connections to other class material. One in particular really stood out for me. I found the connection between the ethical principle of human rights and human dignity to be closely linked to content from our human behavior in the social environment class. One of the principles within this really summed up the foundation of the course content that we've been learning. That was the definition of human rights and human dignity, which the Code of Ethics defines as social workers should uphold and defend each person's physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual integrity and well-being. I felt this definition and its content really spoke to the teachings of a multidimensional approach to people over time that the human behavior class is based on, in which we look at individuals or groups of people from a biopsychosocial approach through different perspectives and theories. So really looking at them in total, which is what the Code of Ethics is speaking to. I'm not currently working in the field of social work. However, I can apply some of the ethics to various personal situations in my life, like I'm sure many of you can as well. One in particular is that social workers need to abide by is the professional conduct, which includes developing and maintaining the required skills and competencies to do our jobs. In this step, we're all taking right now by studying social work at VCU and pursuing our master's degree. In the future, participating in cross-field collaboration or continuing studies will be other ways for us to develop our educational skills necessary to stay competent in our professional field.
The Statement of Ethical Principles of the IFSW and the IASSW presents definitions, principles, and ethical guidelines that are in keeping with what we have learned in our courses and from the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics.
When reading the Statement of Ethical Principles of the IFSW, much of it seems like common sense, but I felt some aspects were presented in a way that served to reinforce what we already know about how to perform ethically as a social worker. In the preface, the IFSW reminds us that as social workers, we are both helpers and controllers. I believe that the aspect of control is not something we always want to admit, but it is important to be aware of this when approaching situations and determining how to confront these situations. In defining social work, the statement reminds us that social work exists where the person interacts with their environment. The IFSW is more concise than the NASW when highlighting core principles of social work. The IFSW mentions only social justice and human rights and dignity as core principles, thus reinforcing these as major concepts and values of the profession. It is under these headings that you will find more explicit reference to integrity, service, and competence, which for the NASW rank as core values. The statement reinforces many concepts and ideas that we have learned, and I also like that toward the conclusion, it reminded social workers that they must be accountable for their choices and actions.
In our readings this week, there seems to be a lot of discussion regarding what constitutes human rights and how those in the social work field should define them in an international context. There also seems to be a lot of vacillation on this issue, as the authors want to support the idea of striving for social justice, while also acknowledging that the concept of what defines a basic human right is socially and culturally constructed. This may explain why the International Federation of Social Workers' Statement of Ethical Principles presents some ethical problems in and of itself. When it states that social workers must, quote, challenge unjust policies, practices, and social conditions that contribute to social exclusion, stigmatization, or subjugation, while also, quote, acting in accordance with the ethical code or guidelines current in their country, it reflects this organization's stance that social workers should act, but only in a way that's in line with their political and cultural environments. What? Maybe this works until you look at some of the countries that the Federation proudly lists as its members, many of whom officially violate human rights, even in the most forgiving definition of the term. Kuwait, Morocco, China, and Iran are all members of this organization. Does the Federation care that in Kuwait it's not an explicit crime to beat one's wife? Or that in Morocco the law doesn't allow for women to inherit more than 50% of property? Do we even need to talk about countries like China or Iran? This is sad. Instead of taking a firm stance on human rights, this document and its organization are hiding behind the flimsy excuse of culture in order to avoid offending those in power in its member countries. This document effectively says, we'd like you to work for social justice, but if you can't, that's okay because we understand. To critically reviewing this document, how can anyone believe that the Federation is taking a stand for human rights, social justice, or anything else for that matter? Look, I'm not saying that it's easy to navigate issues of social justice and human rights in a complex multicultural world. But if we're ever going to make a difference, we need to articulate our goals in a way that can be effective, even if that means ruffling a few feathers. This concludes our presentation. We hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for joining us.